My nose will start running again.
Here, super spread.
I'm a walking petri dish.
Yeah, that's it.
I have one nose for
Right, ready?
Yeah.
We're on.
Good evening, everyone. Calling to order the council work session of August 21st, 2024. I used to be able to read that without my glasses on. Please call the roll.
Mr. Knoll?
Here.
Ms. Zatrak?
Here.
Ms. Weltman?
Here.
Ms. Godek? Here. Mr. Lemay?
Here.
Mr. Gentili?
Here.
Dr. Wong?
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Before we launch into this evening's agenda, and I apologize to everyone, we have an unexpected need to have an executive session at the beginning of our meeting tonight. And so I will entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session for the purpose of discussion of imminent or
Pending or imminent litigation?
pending or imminent litigation.
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Zatrak?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Godek? Yes. Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
Thank you. And we will be back as quickly as we can, respectful of your time. Thank you. in regular council session. Thank you to the audience and our staff for their patience of allowing us to address issues. The first agenda item we are going to get to is approval of the council minutes of July 17th, 24, followed by July 24th. We have a motion regarding July 17th, please.
So moved.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call for the approval of the minutes.
Mr. Newell?
Yes.
Ms. Atrach?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Godek?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
All right, and next, a motion for the approval of the minutes of July 24th, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Newell?
Yes.
Ms. Atrach?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Godek? Yes. Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
All right, next we turn to ordinance 2024-18. This is the amendment to the sign ordinance. We have this evening some additional changes to the last iteration. I think that was before council, just so that council is fully aware. There have been and remain ongoing conversations with representatives of the city and the Glimcher Group, the owner of our wonderful Landerwood development. And it would be my hope, and I know it's probably council's hope, that those productive conversations continue and go forward. In the meanwhile, I'm going to ask Mr. Lemay, who has taken over a drafting pen for a lot of this, as to where things stand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to, this has been before us since May, so we're in month 3. So I want to just kind of reintroduce the notion of why we're doing this. And since it's been so long in the tooth here and been up to the Planning Commission and then back to council. So my objective in doing this is for both aesthetic and safety reasons to eliminate future changeable message signs in the city. As I started out with this legislation many months ago, that I think from an aesthetic standpoint, changeable message signs are far different than fixed signs. They really demand your attention. They demand it in a way that is very intrusive, visually exciting, I guess you could say, and they demand your attention. Unlike a fixed sign where you see it once, you don't need to look at it again because you know it's there. So I think from an aesthetic standpoint, they're deleterious to the city, and also they raise significant safety issues. So, I drafted this legislation to eliminate changeable message signs going forward, and I guess I'd like to have this conversation in 2 parts. At Steve's urging, the legislation took numerous parts of the current regulation of changeable message signs and moved it from our code to a non-codified version. And Steve Byron's suggestion on that was, since we're eliminating future signs, that's something that shouldn't be codified. So you don't have a lot of codification provisions that are in the code that only apply to a very limited set of circumstances. And right now, the limited set of circumstances are the shopping center sign, the library sign, and the school sign. Those still need to be regulated. And so it was his suggestion. So now many of the provisions were in the code about 30 seconds, about not flashing or scrolling. Those are in the back of the document because they pertain only to those signs. So I'd like to divide this conversation to the front part of the document, which are some changes to eliminate future changeable message signs, unless of course we would enact a variance. So we still have the ability to do that if council chooses to on an individual basis. And just walk through that a little bit, and then have a second conversation about the back of the document, which talks about how the city will manage the existing changeable message signs. So while this started with just eliminating the changeable message signs, going through this, you can see in the first part of the document that's redlined, and I'm going to refer to Steve's preference that we use the second document we sent out, which shows all the changes to the existing ordinance in a red line form and is not showing changes to the non-codified in the back, just so ease of reference to all of you. In the course of looking at this, I also went about looking at the sign ordinance and cleaned up some things that I think could be made better. And almost all the redlining you see in the first part of this document is just to make the ordinance better. And those included things like amending the purpose statement. So it's a little bit broader into what we're trying to achieve with the overall sign ordinance, both changeable message and, of course, all regular signs. Redefinition of what is a sign on page 2. That's a better definition. I think it's more inclusive of the things people might call a sign or use as a sign. Defining the term message that was never defined before, so we understand what a message is on a sign. And so all of these changes, except for the one banning future changeable message signs, are really related to just updating our sign code. It's been quite some time since we do that. So if you flip through all those, you can see they're just language changes to make the sign code more readable, more understandable. For example, back in page 4 or 5 in section 4, Scott suggested that we have a color temperature provision on externally illuminated signs, and that we have a very clear indication that all the other signs should have automatic dimming features in them. And then there's a provision that is new back on page 3 about the hours of operation of freestanding signs, which now limits to it's now limited to 11 p.m. to 6 p.m.
6 a.m.
6 a.m. I'm sorry. Yes.
Where are you, Jim?
Now I'm in.
Can you say a section and
Yes, I
see if you
can.
find in a page
So
number?
section 4. And about, half a page down, section, or maybe a full page down from the beginning of section 4, you'll see section F5, where it has that time restriction. Okay. So as we just turn pages here, if someone has a comment or flag something on this first part of the document, happy to get that comment or question or concern as we just go through pages here.
Hi, Jim. I have a question. I know it's been brought up that some businesses, if they're open, feel that they should be able to have their signs on.
Well, keep in mind, this is only the monument sign or the standalone sign, not the store sign. So it doesn't apply to the wall sign, so you can still have, that could still be on if you still have an operating business. So it's a limited number of signs that would apply to.
Okay. In other words, they would still have the ability to have a sign on if their business was open,
Right.
and that could be on past 11 o'clock,
Right,
11 p.m.
right. Any other questions up to that point? Any other comments, concerns? So keeping on with general provisions, I'm now up to section I. So the hours of operation provision was not an update or a revision. It was a new provision which has been added. So there's a few places in this where it's new provision, like banning future changeable message sign. But much of it, I'd probably 2/3, 3/4 of this is just making revisions to make our sign code more understandable and better. So next thing I want to comment on is going on the next page. So it is general provisions, which is part of section 4, and go all the way up to part I. if you're there. So this is the provision that talks about non-conforming use signs and what happens when a sign is non-conforming. It is generally applicable to all signs, not just changeable message signs, just any sign in the city. And part of that language is just updating the language, and part of it is making a change. One of the changes requested by the folks at Glemshire was the ability to update and replace electronic components and upgrades and replacement, which I added to this provision here. You can see about 2/3 of the way down the paragraph I. I think that's important. I want the shopping center as well as the school and the library to have the most up-to-date sign. Better technology, better control, better resolution. That's good for the city. So I added that to there. And the rest is typical language pertaining to non-conforming signs and what happens to those non-conforming signs. Any questions on that? All right, then going up to section 6, which is on the next page.
Is there, you've got a quotation mark after M.
Yes. Steve, can you explain?
Sure. That is if you go to the beginning of that section, you'll see there's a quotation in front of 1269.04. Everything between the quotation marks, starting at before 1269.04 and ending after subsection M, are included in the new language of 1269.04.
I had the same comment for Steve, Mr. Mayor, and wondered why it looked like a stray quote to me, but there's actually a
The
purpose.
other side of that quote exists somewhere.
Here.
I haven't found it, but
It's right here.
Very,
It's
very
right here at the
end.
beginning.
It's so far back.
Keep
At
going.
the-
One more
at the
page.
heading.
It's only a 3-page paragraph.
General provisions, right?
It's like, yeah.
At the heading.
oh, okay. Okay, now I see.
If it wasn't there, Jim would have said, why doesn't this paragraph close?
I got it.
And then we're up to section 6, which is signs permitted in U4. You can see the changes to that. Rather than having, there is this distinction in the prior code between bigger, more than 35,000 and less than 35,000. And whether you were bigger or smaller than that, you've got 2 monument signs rather than 1. I've eliminated that and having it limited to 1 monument sign, which is what the shopping center has now. The other building that's more than 35,000 square feet is the Heinens, and it has no sign now. So they're eligible to have a monument sign out in front, but they've chosen not to do so. I don't believe there's another
But they
building.
could in the future,
They could in the
if
future.
they want to.
Correct.
This does not exclude Heinen's from
No,
doing that.
absolutely not. They could have a 32 square foot sign, 6 feet high in front of their business.
Okay.
But I thought those having 2 monument signs was just more than they needed for, and obviously Heinen's is living without one, and the shopping center has only erected 1 since they've always only had 1.
As we go down Chagrin or up Pine Tree, are there any businesses that currently have 2 monuments?
Well, this is retail only. So no, I don't think any business does. Now, this allows, in addition to the monument sign, the big sign, it has entry and exit signs, which are smaller signs, but I haven't changed that. They're 3-foot signs. That's how the code always was.
Okay.
Any questions to that point? So most of the changes have been the same through very early versions of this document. So I'd like to move on now to the back of the document, which is going to be the uncodified portions of the document. This is in particular sections 8 9, 8, and 9. Yes, sections 8 and 9. The vast majority of what's in section 8 and 9 is taken from our existing code. For example, in Part B, it says, message characters displayed on the sign, or each message shall remain fixed for 30 seconds. Messages shall not flash, including moving video. Changes to messages shall be accomplished. I changed that to say instantaneously, which all the signs does, and the Glimpshare sign does, they told us. And in fact, that's the modern, all the modern codes say instantaneously because they now have that capability. Before we had 3 seconds. And I don't ever see that anymore because maybe that's in the old days, old technology, you couldn't move that fast, but now all of them can. So that changed from the rest of that is in the existing code, but that changed. The big chart in paragraph C, that chart is from the existing code as well. It was a 3-foot candle, maximum brightness measured based on this chart from 10 feet to 40 feet. I added the words in excess of ambient light, which is what that is. So how that is measured is ideally you fully light up the sign at night, you stand back from it, and you see if it's 3-foot candles. In the complete dark, it should be 3-foot candles. During the day, it should automatically dim based on ambient light, either get brighter or dimmer based on ambient light. But in all events, not more than 0.3 foot candles in excess of ambient. And that is the industry standard. That's in dozens of codes that I've read. That's what was in our code. It's very consistent with what I see in codes, all the codes that I've read. Such displays do not emulate traffic control devices. That was from the old code. Default should, in part E there, the default should cause the sign to go dark. That is a capability that is now in all the codes, and it's under all the modern signs. If they malfunction, they just go dark, so you don't get blinking or a fixed message that's doing something to you. So I'd like to focus, any questions on that? Because almost all of that is from our existing code. And we just moved it from the codified portion back to this, at Steve's suggestion, back to the back where it's not codified, only because it will have limited applicability going forward to the limited number of changeable message signs. So his thought was not to, things that are very kind of limited applicability, Steve's thought was, you know, take it out of the code, put it non-codified. It's still an ordinance, still effective, but it's not something permanently in our code that only has very, very limited application. Steve, did I say that okay?
Yeah, absolutely correct.
So now I'd like to turn back to, if you go back to section 9, section A, what I attempted to do there was start to put some restrictions aimed at safely operating the sign in part A. And I want to talk a little bit about how I thought through those and where I came from. So part of it is reading both federal and state highway codes about how they regulate changeable message signs and what they do. Now, clearly, a local ordinance sign isn't the same as a highway sign. We're not driving, hopefully, at 75 miles an hour on the circle. But there's many principles that play into those signs that apply to all changeable message signs, because the regulations in state codes and in federal codes all go to making a sign as visible as possible, as readily comprehensible as possible, and as quickly as possible. That's to minimize driver distraction. So if the driver can see the sign, understand the information, put their eyes back on the road, that's pure safety. And so at the highway level, they're very highly regulated. And I'm not proposing to do that level of regulation. But what's important is the principle applies the same. The principle they're trying to do is a message that the driver can quickly get the information and get their eyes back on the road. And so if you look at federal and state highway codes, they do a number of things to try and have minimize driver distraction and minimize the chance of accidents because of the sign. So a few things, and I would just want to talk about them, and then we can talk some more. One is the positive contrast orientation, which is a dark background and brighter letters. They found, the research in that has found is those signs with the dark background and brighter letters, like the orange school sign, dark background, amber letters, which is the ideal color, And that's why you see most traffic control signs have a dark background and amber letters. But 25% faster comprehension time with a positive contrast orientation, dark background, bright letters, as opposed to a bright background and dark letters. So that aids driver comprehension more quickly, less eyes on the sign, more eyes on the road, and that improves safety. And that's why it's mandatory for highway signs under the federal and state code. There's a growing presence. I read a number of local ordinances that have that positive contrast orientation in their code. What's interesting more is in Canada, all the municipalities, because of a federal highway guidelines, have positive contrast orientation in their local ordinances for the sign. A few US cities do, but in Canada, it is universal. I think it's just evidence of how strong the science is to make signs safe, to have that orientation of messaging on the sign. That kind of orientation has another benefit too, because it allows a dark background and brighter letters. It's minimal brightness at night. So in other words, if you're driving and see the sign at night and it's all lit up because the sign is bright white with black letters, it's a very bright sign. And that can be that very distracting, disoriented, even give you a little vision blindness temporarily. But with positive contrast orientation, not only is the sign, you can see the sign faster and comprehend it faster, it's a less bright sign to blind you at night when you're driving through it. So there's two benefits to that. And there's very strong science behind that, orienting your messages in that way for faster driver comprehension and less driver distraction. The other thing these codes provide is for non-complicated messages. So not too many words on the page. So in the limited time the driver has to see it. Many of the highway signs are monochromatic, so the letters on the black background are a single color. The research has found the more colors you have on a sign, the longer it takes to comprehend that. And there's a number of surveys, even on those signs, highway signs, where they put some letters in orange and some in red. And drivers find that distracting, harder to comprehend, and so less safe than having monochromatic messages. The other thing, they at the federal and state level, they have consistent, easy to read fonts. So if you have a real curly Q, scrolly font, and then you have a block font, and then you have another font, the brain takes a long time to calculate from one font to the next font to the next font. So all federal highway signs use the same font, both fixed signs as well as changeable message signs. Believe it or not, it's called Highway Gothic. That's the name of the font. So you heard it here first. And when you're driving down the federal highway and you see the big green sign with the white letters, you can tell your seatmate, "Did you know that's the Highway Gothic font there?" And they'll be very impressed with your erudition. The size of the font is important. Obviously, if it's too small, it's hard to read. The sign brightness is on all the codes I read, both local, state, and federal, having an automatic dimmer so that as ambient light decreases, the brightness of the sign decreases. So regulations on the height of the sign, because they don't want drivers' eyes going up too high to look at the sign. They want the sign as where a driver can see it comfortably without distracting too far from the road. The placement of the sign is important. The regulations, particularly for changeable message sign, prefer that it not be on curves or at the end of the curve. And the theory on that is as you're driving on a curve, you're actively driving to stay, as opposed to on a straightaway, you're just going straight and holding steady. So those are some of the things that, again, we're not in a federal highway. They all don't apply. But the message of all of them is to minimize driver distraction and have minimum, get the message quickly and get your eyes back on the road. So taking those into account, what I put in the ordinance, what I did put in the ordinance is the changeable, the positive contrast orientation. And I wanted the font, just that, and that the character size be sufficient so it's legible. Those are the two things out of that list of 7 or 8 things that you see in state and federal highway codes to aid, to minimize driver distraction. I added that. Now, I understand what I'm proposing. So if you go to section 9A, tell me when everyone's there. So as the mayor mentioned, we had discussions with the Glenshire folks. And I thought it was a great meeting, very cordial. I made some progress on understanding each other, but I wanted to leave plenty of time to have further discussions before this impacted them, which is why in my original ordinance, I put none of this goes into effect until January 2025 to provide plenty of time to have further discussions. Because I think it's all of our intent that we reach an accommodation with them, to have an effective sign for them, but a safe sign for our community. And I really think there's a way to get there. But what I'd like to propose tonight on section 9A is further in that regard to allow more flexibility and time for discussions. If you look at, is everyone at 9A?
Mhm.
So what I'd like to do is all message is make one change to this existing ordinance, this proposal, or I guess two changes actually. So all messages displayed on the sign shall have a positive contrast orientation with all message characters in the color amber displayed on the back background. Before I get to that, let me say one thing about it. So the two signs that are at the library and at the school comply with all of the requirements I just went through. In other words, they are in compliance. If we actually applied the Federal Highway Code to those signs, they are in compliance because of it's amber letters on a black background, so it's positive contrast orientation. Their messages are simple and short. They're located on a straightaway. The size of the font is, I've ridden by it hundreds of times. Every mile I ride by all the signs and take 3 laps around the circle at least. The sign brightness has never been, the height of the sign is local. The placement of the sign is where it needs to be. So those are very good changeable message signs from a safety perspective. Very, very readable. And so they really raise very few concerns from a safety perspective in terms of how they're being operated today. But given that the shopping center sign is not operated that way today, what I'm proposing to do to this is all messages displayed on the sign shall have a positive contrast orientation with all message characters in the color amber displayed on a black background. And then I would put in the word excluding.
Wait, where are you putting that word?
9A
Yeah, but where in the sentence?
after the word black background. Everyone tracking?
Mhm.
Then I would take out the words, except that in recognition of the prior manner of operation, delete that. And then continue back with the text, so it would say excluding the changeable copy sign located adjacent to the traffic circle at 36659 Pine Tree Road, period. So that regulation about positive contrast orientation wouldn't apply to this sign to give us more time to have discussions with the Glenshire folks about reaching an accommodation with them. So they can continue in terms of their messaging now, how they have. And I would delete the rest of that paragraph. So everything from such sign through black and white would be deleted. Okay? And because of that, I would delete part F, which was the delayed operation provision of this. With that deletion, the only thing that would change how Glenshire operates, and I don't think it would change at all, is the first sentence of paragraph B says message characters displayed on sign shall be of sufficient size to be legible to drivers passing the sign on the adjoining roadway. And I think, I don't know that they're not having legible characters now, but I wanted that as a general principle for all the signs. So with that, I don't believe anything in this changes how the shopping center is operating their sign today. This will give us more time to have more discussions with them about reaching an accommodation so they have effective communication for their tenants and their customers. And the city has a sign that we're comfortable is not going to contribute to a driver distraction and potential traffic accidents on the circle.
One other technical point, you're going to make letter G into an F because you're deleting F
Good catch.
just as a little.
Yes, G becomes F.
Does the opening If that, okay, I understand the deletion, you're not even submitting that as part of the amendment. But is any change necessary to the first paragraph of section 9, where it talks about continuing to be subject to chapter 1269 as amended from time to time? Does that
No.
inadvertently pick
See,
up anything
No, that's,
that we don't want to pick up here?
no.
Because I understand the goal is to leave things, open to conversation.
So the reason that's there is because we've now non-codified those regulations, but they still have to be subject to the rest of our codes. For example, if they need to maintain their sign, right? So they
Right.
can't let it fall in disrepair. That's in the codified code. That applies to all signs. So Paul, the building inspector, needs to go out and inspect the sign if there's an issue. So there's all these general provisions that have to apply to even these signs that are now mostly regulated in the non-codified portion. So that just pulls those in so that it's not floating free floating.
And the ability to upgrade the sign technologically is in the codified
Is in the codified.
portion. So you want to
Right.
incorporate that permissive aspect of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So Steve, are there any further questions, comments? So with that, Steve, I'd like to make a motion to pass this tonight. If you could give me the right words to do.
Sure, it's a motion to adopt ordinance number 2024-18 as amended, including the changes that were discussed at the table and made to the draft that has been previously circulated. With the final draft, it'll come to Sheila's office
Right.
for signature.
So I'm moving what Steve said.
I will second that. I also, Jim, would like to thank you for all the work you've put in on this. You've put a lot of time into it, and you've made it very understandable to me. And it's not only to me, after I've read a lot of the material as well, a lot of the peripheral material from other ordinances and other countries, and a lot of the evidence of safety is there, but it's also, as we've talked about, this is, and you said this right off the bat, it's not just a safety issue, it's an aesthetic issue as well.
Right.
And I think it's important that we look at both of those things. It's just not one or the other, it's both. But
Agree
thank you
completely.
for the thoroughness.
Agree completely, yes. That it's both.
Can I ask if discussions continue, how is that ultimately reflected
So
or
what
documented or whatever?
Yeah, what I would hope is that we'd have discussions and reach accommodation on how it will be operating with perhaps some of these restrictions, not all of them, it's not a highway sign. And that we would amend the uncodified portion of the ordinance to reflect that in here at some future date.
And just procedurally, that would require a separate ordinance and a separate trip to the planning commission and separate deliberation and discussion.
Right.
But
Right.
this gets this particular legislative action off the
Right.
council's docket.
So to be clear, and the council understands, and hopefully our friends at the plaza, what we're trying to do here is pass legislation that is going to address the general changeable sign ordinance that we have and explicitly carves out the plaza so that we can continue to have productive conversation with the plaza representatives.
The regulations that were in the code still apply.
Right.
You have 30 seconds, all that kind of stuff. But it carves out the one provision I added in there that would change how they operate their sign.
Right.
So that, other than having legible characters, they can operate the sign the same manner they've operated pending our further discussions.
I'm sorry, I have just one last question. You just triggered my thought about this. The legible term that you use, is there any way, do you feel it needs defining or?
There is deep science on the size of the character, the speed on the roadway, the distance from the sign. So there is plenty of science on that. We can do that and try and incorporate it. I was hoping general legislation on legible from a passing driver.
Okay.
I mean, all drivers have to take an eye test, right? So it's,
Right, I think the reality is, we're not going to be charging Mr. Qualisick to sit there and do some sort of scientific evaluation of
Yeah.
legibility.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the Supreme Court's pornography. You know it when you see it.
Mm.
It's legible or it's not. People know it. Okay, is there any more discussion the council wishes to engage in about this? Okay, we have a motion and a second then, and the clerk would call the roll.
Mr. Knoll,
Yes.
Ms. Atruk,
Yes.
Ms. Weltman,
Yes.
Ms. Bodek,
Yes.
Mr. Lemay.
yes,
Mr. Gentile.
Yes.
Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Okay,
thank you all.
thank you. And we look forward to continuing our conversation with, okay? Next on our agenda, we move to 2024-26 with the controversial topic of an ordinance to approve replacement pages to the Pepper Pike codified ordinances. Mr. Law Director, you want to tell us what this is?
Sure, this is an annual event. The American Legal Publishing Company tracks changes in state law to our traffic code and criminal code and incorporates those changes in state law so that our municipal ordinances are exactly the same as the state code substantively. And then they also incorporate the new material, any zoning legislation or administrative provisions or building code or whatever, what have you, in other sections of the code that aren't legislated by the state. They pick up those changes and put them into our code book. And it's basically housekeeping every year.
And these
Now
are
you're
provisions
talking.
where we're obliged to follow the state code on all of these things.
You don't want to have a conflict with state code.
Yeah.
And the best way to avoid having a conflict is when they make a change to their criminal statute, you make a change to your criminal statute so that you track it.
And if we wanted to do something, we could legally.
Well, you can impose higher penalties than they do,
Mm,
but you can't turn a misdemeanor into felony or, if you start messing around with the elements of a crime,
Right.
I think you're going to have problems.
Right,
So most of the time, what they're doing is modifying technical stuff related to DUI, driving under suspension, driving under the influence, that sort of thing. And we just pick that up so our legislation reads the same way and so that the chief knows what laws to enforce in the city.
So I'm assuming they're on top of it in the police department, for example, because they're getting it elsewhere. But in other places departmentally, how do we push out just to make sure everyone has the awareness if it's more than just a minute?
Well, the building department gets the zoning changes and building code changes as we adopt them. So this change, they may reference, and the nice thing is that we don't have to go through and change a bunch of books like we used to back in the day. But they will be referring to, once you adopt this ordinance, American Legal, if they haven't already done it, we'll put it on the website so that everybody who's accessing our codes will see what the current law is.
That's what I was really
Yeah.
asking, and the
Yeah.
due diligence piece of making sure we're
The
actually.
The publishing
effectively
company
doing that.
takes care of that. Sometimes they make a mistake, and if somebody sees something, let me know, let Sheila know, and we can let American Legal Publishing know. But they're pretty good. They're pretty good at catching.
Steve, this contract is with Walter H. Drain Company?
Yeah, and American Legal is a successor in interest. They've acquired the assets of Drain.
And so we don't change the name of the other
There,
party?
it's, yeah, I'll bet you still have Ameritech lines running to your house or Ohio Belt lines running to your house, even though those entities haven't existed in years.
Seems
Is there a reason not to?
seems wrong.
Is there a reason not to? Just,
This is the form that they send to us. It's I think they may use this to keep track of which contract they're on with us.
oh, came from where?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'll move it.
Can we
Second.
move to suspend? you mean?
Suspend, yes, move to suspend.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Atrach?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Bodick?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes,
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
And a motion to adopt.
so moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Atrach?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Bodick?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes,
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
Great. We'll move on to resolution 2024-27, dealing with certifying delinquent charges for nuisance abatement. Mr. Brzezinski?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, just like the previous ordinance, this resolution we do annually. Throughout the year, as we receive complaints on high grass and high grass isn't cut by the property owner, our service department goes out, cuts the grass, charges a higher fee because we certainly don't want to get into the landscaping business on personal property. And these are the ones where people have not paid. We will certify these and this will be on their property taxes for next year.
We always give them notice, right, and a chance to come.
Oh, yeah.
Who administers this? Is that? you, Jim?
Sure.
Yeah, some building department.
And they just don't respond, and that's why we do this.
Yeah, most of some of the properties are just basic, vacants.
Vacant.
So,
There's no one there.
yeah, and then we do it probably on a schedule of once a month. We go around to especially early on, maybe twice a month, just to keep it looking good.
And is this all grass cutting? There's been no other violations that we've had to?
No, we don't deal with any of the violations.
And we get complaints, why is the charge so high? Why is it not like a landscaper? Because I will become your landscaper. I want to be your landscaper. And it generally happens once or twice and they start cutting.
How many total properties did we end up cutting this year? Because
I don't really have that information, but I could tell you there's regulars and there's probably 8 to 10 properties are regulars, which means they're year to year. We have them. They think that we're supposed to call them and tell them to cut their grass. Well,
So is there anything else we can do about the ones that are very regular or continuing? Is there anything that would help you guys departmentally, since this isn't really what you?
this
isn't
technically
really
isn't
your
your job.
job.
yeah, I don't think, how do you acquire the property? Does the city acquire the property?
No.
So
No, there's
No,
nothing
you
else
know,
you
it's,
can do.
it's,
Nothing else we can do?
not
We
too
just
much we
keep
can
going
do.
and cutting and charging.
as long as we stick to our procedure of giving them a couple days.
Okay,
And usually the 2 days turns into 3 because it falls around a weekend or something.
sure. You're not rushing
We're
in.
not,
Do this.
we're not going out there and not giving them a chance.
just as a matter of information, it says SPA amount. Do you know what that?
That's what it shows on your
Property
tax.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Special assessment.
special
Yeah.
assessment.
Oh, okay,
I just,
gotcha, thank you.
I have a question. We had just received an email on Tuesday from a resident about some other addresses that I don't see on here. I don't see other people CC'd other than council. Should I just forward this over to Paul to take an inspection of these properties?
Yeah. Send them to Paul. All right, any other discussion? Do we have a motion on this?
This one's just a motion to adopt.
So this is a resolution, so could we have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Atrach?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
yes.
Ms. Govic?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yes.
Mr. Gentili?
Yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
All right, and next we come to Resolution 2024-28. And Mr. Brzezinski, why don't you?
Yeah, the caption's wrong, just so you're aware. We're changing general fund to capital improvement fund.
Yes,
In the ordinance, it says that now.
in the ordinance, it says Capital Improvement Fund.
Where are you?
On Resolution 24-28, it's a declaration of official intent, and it's to reimburse the capital improvement fund, because that's where the expenditure.
In the agenda?
That's
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
yeah, on the agenda, it says general
But
fund.
the
And on the
resolution is correct.
The resolution's correct.
The resolution that just got revised.
That's correct.
So that's here.
All right.
All
So,
right, thank
Joe?
you, Mayor. This goes back to the 2023 budget when we thought we were gonna be rolling with the Shaker Sewer and Storm Sewer project. We then brought it up in the budget meeting for the 2024 because it was carrying over. But we had asked the state for grant money. And the state said, well, we can't give you any grant money based on this project, but we can offer you a 0% loan for 20 years for the total amount of $262,500. So in the budget that we did pass for 2024, in the capital projects fund as a revenue line item, we did have the 262,500. This resolution allows us to receive that money. We will then start making payments next year.
This is how we always contemplated doing this?
Mhm.
Okay, with a zero interest.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we asked for, I think, Joseph, we asked for a grant, but they said you can have a zero interest loan, but we can't give you a grant.
Is this, when's the last zero, what's the last project we took advantage of this?
Lander Road?
Lander Road.
It was Lander Road.
And then previous to that, Brainerd.
Okay.
And we thought grant money might be available, is that?
Well, yeah, you
why
always
did they-
ask.
Well, we always ask, but
Right.
was this what we actually anticipated, that grant money was kind of a wish, but not a likelihood?
Yeah, back in probably 2022, when we started this.
Okay,
And then when they said, no, we can't give you any grant monies, but we can offer you a 0% loan, we said, when the point comes, we will, accept that. We've talked to council about it.
sure.
It was ideally in a perfect world would have happened in 23, but because that project got delayed and then just basically finished up this year, now it's time for us, I want the money before the end of the year.
Sure, I
Go forward,
understand
yeah.
that part of it, yes.
There's no reason not to do this. Absolutely not, okay.
Sure.
Unless the interest rate goes negative.
Yeah.
Right. Then we'll be kicking ourselves.
Right?
It happened in Europe last year, so.
Right?
All right, so could we have a motion for the adoption of 2024-28?
So moved.
Second,
Roll call, please.
Mr. Knoll?
Yes.
Ms. Atrod?
Yes.
Ms. Weltman?
Yes.
Ms. Govic?
Yes.
Mr. Lemay?
Yeah,
Mr. Gentili?
yes.
Dr. Wong?
Yes.
Okay. Next, it's this received a ordinance number, which I suppose is okay, but I would have been perfectly happy just to have this as a discussion document for council. At the planning commission meeting earlier this month, the topic came up that someone was, the building department had noticed someone regarding their operation of a business in their home. And this business involved quite a number of cars being parked in and around the house. First on the street, then they moved them up and just loaded up the circulating with a lot of cars. And Paul observed this driving around, and he'd given them a notice, and they ended up acknowledging that basically it was a business that they were operating. It's a nice business, but it's it was a business. The point was, and the objection, and the reason it came to be apparent to Paul just driving around, was because of that number of automobiles that were parking. And it changes the nature of the neighborhood when that happens. And that's the objection. You know, we live in an for probably, and as part of that conversation, Mr. Smerigan, who has other meetings tonight, so he can't be here, observed that our ordinance is one of the few he encounters that does not have some provision for the operation of a business in a U1 district within the home by the homeowner. So and that he thought it was appropriate that this city consider doing such a thing, particularly in light of the changing world we're in, where coming out of the COVID experience, as much as before, there were likely many people who operated some very low-level business out of their house, be it an accounting practice, a law practice, a little knitting business that maybe they went to craft shows and did whatever they do. That were not apparent to neighbors that this was even going on. But nevertheless, if you read our ordinance, it's simply prohibited. You can't do it. And coming out of COVID, the reality is that more people than ever before do some level of their business operating out of their home. The objection of the city remains and would be, you cannot change the nature of the neighborhood. I don't think there is any interest as to what someone does inside their house that people are unaware about, and
Other than manufacturing explosives and things like that.
things like that.
Yeah.
That's
Things
covered.
like that.
That's covered by the ordinance. No loud noises, no booms.
So anyway, what I had done was ask George simply to push out for council to begin having a conversation, sort of a generic ordinance that other cities have adopted, and that's what you have in front of you. There are things about it that I read that, I could make comment that I don't like certain aspects of it. Like, I think it's
It's particularly outrageous you're allowing millinery in a home. That's just, how dare you? What-
Yes, yes. As a hat lover,
Hat makers. You know how dangerous that is.
yeah, we don't want lead in the city, I guess. Like, there's a provision in here that the business needs to be confined to the square footage of the home, not in a garage, not in an accessory building. I can easily agree with it shouldn't be in a garage. We don't want people to turn their garages into offices and not have people be able to accommodate the parking in their cars in a garage. That is not a preferred way that this community has traditionally maintained its houses. We require houses being built to have garages, to store cars in. Now, the accessory building thing, I have a different feeling about, to be honest. The way that this, generic one poses it. If someone has their, approved 12 by 16 shed out in their backyard, I don't care if they store lawnmowers in it, or if they set up their paint studio, their artist studio in there, or, their laptop and do some work out there. That, I don't think personally that's really our concern or interest. So long as the rest of the ordinance, that the nature of the neighborhood is not being changed, and it's not apparent to people that that's what's occurring. The garage would be a different situation because it would force cars out into a driveway to be parked overnight or forever, since their garage is now an office or whatever use is being made out of it. So anyway, I want to push this out it seemed both a practical and a realistic thing that we ought to address. I don't think it would, as this is drafted even currently in this generic form, it still would not allow the nature of the business that brought this really up as a topic in conversation at planning, because they had all these cars, parked in and around the home. So that would not suddenly be permitted under this. And I just want to get it out there for a conversation with council to see, what do we want to do with such a thing? Now, this is technically a first reading, so we can get it back to the planning commission for their input and thoughts about this. But even going back to planning commission, I just wanted to get the feedback of council as to what do you think about this?
So I'd just like to add in, because I was at planning and zoning, I was part of this conversation. And Rick is right, there was a parking issue. This was a business that was it was a service business. I mean, I guess I could say it because it was a public meeting. It was a yoga studio with signups multiple times a day for classes, groups of people attending. At this point, I mean, I suppose if they had more success, it could even have been more, 3 times a day, sometimes starting in the morning, early, 6:30, I think it was.
So it wasn't just a
Going till late.
one-off, once a month, it was.
No, it was daily. It was
Persistent.
actually 7 days a
It was
week,
daily.
Saturday
7
and
days?
Sunday, although, so I don't need to go into the details of their scheduling. They had a website, they had to sign up for, daily, monthly passes. It was a real business. And I think the website has since come down. If anybody wants to see, I have the screenshots, but, so it was a real business. And the only question I have, and I think this is valid, that we need probably something. And the question is this exact wording what we want? We really haven't had the opportunity to look at other cities' ordinances on this. So some of these things like millinery, whatever, hat making,
George grabbed this
good
from a
luck.
1908 statute.
Good luck with starting that hat making business, but that's wonderful. And some of these, especially these home crafts, jewelry making, things like that. Other things, though, just want to see what other people were doing. I mean, some of these things I would just want to make sure that a real business wasn't taking place because of the idea that this is a residential neighborhood. There are some very positive things in here talking about the external appearance. So you see it in some more, I remember seeing it in some inner ring neighborhoods like University Heights, a doctor's office that at one point was adjacent to a home with an external entrance. You see it in some places with an outbuilding. So I'd want to consider whether we wanted an outbuilding where you maybe have a small florist shop, on the front lawn. Right now, we wouldn't allow that building probably on the front lawn anyway. But I just think we need a little time to make sure that this exact ordinance is what we want. But the premise of it, I think, is great. I think maybe it's something we need to cover. People do work in their homes sometimes, and certainly if you're, working on tax season in your home or doing your accounting for your business, things like that, that obviously would not be objectionable. Just would love to go through this list and make sure. I mean, I don't know what I think about sharpening tools. I don't know. I've never contemplated that. I don't know. I don't know that I really knew about that business. But some of these things, I just would like to take a pass at other ordinances and make sure this is our ordinance.
One specific thing I was thinking of is people who give music lessons in their homes,
Yeah,
which,
there's a good one.
right, like, so you have traffic coming and going, but theoretically 1, like maybe 2 as students are changing.
Sure.
And I'm thinking like my son went to piano lessons at a house in Woodmere and it was not, to my mind, it didn't feel disruptive to the neighborhood. I don't know, the neighbors maybe felt differently. But, to me, I think that is an acceptable use, but
Yeah.
I don't know where, again, like where's that line?
That's
right?
why I want to look at other ordinances,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I would also find that to be an acceptable use. But if somebody was running, I don't know, sing-along music classes for large, like sort of almost like a preschool,
Right, like a
all
big
day
music
in their
circle type of
house,
thing, right?
that might be objectionable to
Yeah.
the neighbors. Not that there's anything objectionable about those businesses, but you see, that's
the
a
amount of
really,
traffic
that's a
generated.
really good point.
Yeah.
And it's the traffic, it's the times of day, it's,
That's
the
it.
constant
Your
flow of
examples,
people.
your examples are good ones. We don't want someone running a daycare out of their residence. That would not be something I would assume, because there's a lot of pickup and drop off that goes on. So that wouldn't be good. A couple of years ago, we had someone come seeking to construct firearms in their home.
Right.
We're not going to encourage that.
Or
That-
any
that-
other
that would-
major manufacturing.
Right,
you know?
right. That's not a good idea for us. So,
Yeah.
this is, like I said, this is a generic thing
Yeah.
just to kick off a conversation.
It's a fair point. Jack is a great example because my next door neighbors both play for the orchestra and they do give music lessons sometime outside and I really enjoy hearing it. So is that noise? I don't think so, but
Right.
Depends
Well,
on-
well, I
depends on
think
who's
that, and I
Some,
think
some places you have to pay extra for that.
yeah.
And I think that's the point. Right now, it's more of a polite turning aside from
Yeah,
an activity we know is going on.
yeah.
And it's just, it's, I don't like,
And it's not the commercial aspect.
no,
It's disturbing. It's the traffic, it's the noise, it's
Right.
the vibration, it's the, disruption of the community.
The
Volume
things-
of people.
Objectionable.
the things that we turn our head aside are the things that are so benign, no one cares. And
So
those things shouldn't be illegal for people.
No, and I look at our ordinances as really like our guidebook of how to be a good neighbor, do those
Right.
things. The fact that it's lacking, that we don't have anything in there, and the opportunity to put something to really define what is okay and maybe what's not, for people to even read this and then know what they can and can't do, I believe is really helpful. And gives everybody a good framework to base their choices off of. So I like the conversation. I don't know that I love all the language, but I think us collaborating together, to come up with something valuable, it will really be good.
So the danger, and I think we should hold off on sending this to planning yet.
Oh,
I'd
it's
like
not
to
there.
refine it here first.
Mhm.
And it strikes me the danger is, it's defining, it's drawing the line about what's allowed. You say, these are allowed. And you edge into the manufacturing if you're not careful, right? And so how do you define?
Well, there's some things we may want to affirmatively exclude.
Yeah, that's because I don't know that you even need the lead-in paragraph here. And it could say, home businesses are prohibited if they have all these effects on the neighborhood and the neighbors, blah, 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 blah. And you don't need to have a list of baking and dressmaking and decorating services because there's 1,000 examples that are like that or benign. And you don't want to accidentally say, well, if it's not listed, am I excluded?
Right, the use of the word manufacturing is a pretty loaded word.
Yeah, very well.
That goes everywhere from baking pies
If
to,
you've got a woodworking wood shop, you're manufacturing chessboards and dressers, right?
Well, and by the way, baking, we think of somebody making cupcakes and putting out cupcakes. But if somebody set up a major baking
Commercial
operation,
oven, yeah.
right, right,
I mean, that wouldn't be okay either. I mean, we're not contemplating that. We're thinking a home business.
Yeah.
right.
So that's why I just, and I think you might have also been implying that, Rick, that, I just want to see how other people
Yeah.
wrote these ordinances.
How to draw that distinction? We should get a bunch of ordinances, because I gotta think people have wrestled with that manufacturing type.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Because dressmaking is manufacturing, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Technically.
so, yeah. But by the same token, right now in our ordinance, is manufacturing prohibited somehow? Like the guy who wanted to make arms in the house?
You
is
can't
that-
make
No, that was prohibited.
Explicitly, because it said manufacturing?
No, it's not consistent with the single-family use. Single-family residential use. And it's
Okay.
not a customary accessory use.
Okay, to a single family residence.
Yeah,
So that's kind of, all right, that's a little squishy, and I understand.
and that one was more complicated because it required federal approval for him to be dealing with this. There were a lot of
Yeah.
other,
And they weren't the
things.
owner, they weren't the actual owner of the home either.
That's
which was
right.
Part of
So-
the conversation.
Kind of technically, we're expanding permitted accessory uses by allowing this in a way. We're saying we're going to let you do this, but it's not a customary accessory use to,
Well, I think it is a customary accessory use. It's just been prohibited. I think there are a lot of people who, I'm not naming any names, but there may be a lot of people who have practiced law from their residence for some period of time.
so it's become customary
I think
You
you
could
go
argue-
throughout the city, you're gonna,
because we've not taken affirmative steps to.
you can't, if there's no way you can enforce something like that where there's no outside impact.
Well, the other thing is, your income, or when you do your taxes, some people write off a portion of their home for business. That's been around for a long time. That
That's
would
right.
apply in this
That's
situation
what
as
I'm
well.
saying. We have a law that prohibits something that we know is a common practice.
And is okay with the federal government.
And remember that not being able to adjust to the times, because maybe this made some sense back in 1966, but you had the provision in your code that you couldn't amend your zoning code without a vote of the people. And, you know, I think that's always dumb to carve out council's ability to adjust to current conditions. And we're going to have that discussion at the
So
Charter Review
Now,
Committee.
the other thing here is the 15% of the house, the size limitation. I'm curious where that came from because.
Yeah.
I don't even know
So-
if George could tell you that one. He
So
just
Steve-
pulled something for us and
Yeah, this is George's drafting from an existing code somewhere.
But we would prohibit dangerous things like building explosives by having this, things that you can't do stuff that's dangerous or whatever word you would use. That's how we'd get to that.
Yeah,
It's not really in there as explicitly now.
well, if it only blows up their own house.
Well, I mean, things that are illegal, dangerous,
Yeah.
yada, yada,
Yeah,
yada,
yeah.
right?
yeah, there should be that sort of exclusion.
Right.
Some version of that exclusion.
Yeah.
Well, remember that the zoning code isn't going to prohibit everything that's illegal to do in your house.
Because-
This is going to say, as long as your home occupation doesn't have an impact on neighboring properties, it's not a violation of the zoning code. You could be still violating other laws,
Should we
fire
pack
code,
that,
for example.
do we pack that into the building code, these excluded things?
There are probably already laws that prohibit a lot of the activities that you're concerned with.
So we just have to check that box. Illegal things we know are not allowed. You can't, their problem doing something illegal is not that they violated the zoning code.
Right.
The question is if we deem it dangerous in a residential
So,
neighborhood, I guess.
just-
right?
Well, we're already, the activity conducted must be clearly incidental and subordinate to the use of the premises for residential purposes. I would say anything that you're thinking of that could blow up the house is not consistent. That's not clearly incidental to residential use, is running the risk of blowing up your house. I'm just throwing that out
It's a
there.
little tiny, small explosive that.
There you go.
What about growing marijuana in your house?
That's regulated by state law and you're permitted to do it. You can have a plant.
Can you do that though if you sell it?
You have to have a license to sell it. It's for personal consumption only.
Okay, so you couldn't do that then.
Yeah, and I don't think I think we prohibited
you-
marijuana in Pepper Pike anyway,
That's what I think.
Prohibited the
commercial sale.
commercial sale,
Commercial sale.
We didn't prohibit the agriculture too.
not
the
for an,
agricultural
not
use.
for an individual, I don't think. We
What about-
waded into that swamp.
But don't
I
we have something about the agricultural piece? Don't we have something with that? Didn't that come up? Now I don't remember where.
I'll look for it.
Maybe we don't. Maybe we just. Not individual, like,
Rick, can George give us some examples of other
Yeah.
Yeah.
ordinances
And
from
maybe
other,
Paul is-
other communities?
yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, have you seen this in other,
Yeah, maybe Moreland Hills.
Moreland Hills, they have one? Yeah, that'd be a good one to say.
Yeah, I think we should get a few
Yeah.
of them to look at.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Somebody can pull those.
Yeah.
Maybe just the surrounding communities
Yeah.
or,
Yeah, I'd really like to massage this here and then we'll send it to planning, yeah.
I agree, Jim. I think that's.
But why
the way to
make
go.
them work on something that isn't ready? Then we'll have to send it back. That's what would
Yeah.
happen.
Right, massage.
that's
it
what I
here.
was saying. I wasn't such a fan
Yeah,
of
we're
having
not ready.
an ordinance number on this. I think that's a little premature, actually.
Okay.
Our ordinance says all cultivation, processing, and retail dispensing of medical marijuana, whether licensed or not, are prohibited.
So that's cultivation.
Yeah,
That's
cultivation.
prohibited.
Yeah, you
Growing.
can't have like a farm.
But that can't overcome the state law allowing individual personal consumption.
Remember that the state law allows municipal home rule for regulation of marijuana activity. In other words, they haven't said that you can use it anywhere. They left local government with the authority to prohibit things.
So our,
Which this
ord-
community's
our,
not.
ord- so our ordinance is prohibiting that individual growth and use under the state law? The council
Prohibit
understand they were doing that?
You can't have your marijuana plant, Mayor.
I don't know the
You are-
grow lights, so it's
You are
not me,
asking
but-
that.
So we understand.
Ask him for a friend,
I
yeah.
thought we were talking about, like turning, well, I
Yeah.
don't know,
I thought we were talking about commercial
Yeah.
businesses.
Commercial.
Expensive.
I thought it was
Commercial growth.
Sales, yeah.
Says cultivation.
I thought it was like
Commercial.
mass, I thought it was mass cultivation.
But
It was
commercial
not.
cultivation.
Right.
And those kind of things should, like, that's not in this, like, something like that, like turning your house into a place either we're full of computer servers, by the way. Shouldn't be able to fill your house completely with computer servers. I mean, these are homes, so I guess it's generally implied here, but I'd love to see how these things are treated elsewhere.
I think we should.
I don't know what you mean by that.
I'm saying, I don't know what that ordinance is talking about. I was getting back to this original ordinance that we're not covering here, turning the internal part of a home into a non-home use. I mean, we're hitting on it in that vague
Right, well,
language.
that's why it's that 15% thing.
Yeah,
in
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So who's going to be sending us the ordinances, or is a council member expected to do that? Or Steve, would you send us those? Like how are we going to get the narrative?
I guess we'll collect them first and then we can distribute.
Then
Steve can
distribute.
distribute them.
Okay,
Yeah.
Or Sheila, someone can
Okay.
distribute them.
okay.
Okay. Anything more for tonight on this? Okay. All right. Good conversation. I appreciate it, everyone. Next, we will go to committees and department heads. Is planning the only, I think the planning's the only committee we've had. Okay.
And
Charter
charter
review.
review.
Oh, charter
Charter
review.
review.
Yes.
That's right.
Who wants to report on, sure, one of our liaisons should report on charter review.
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Did you have a planning to do first? Did you have planning to do first, Melanie?
You can go first. It's fine.
Okay, well, we've had the first two meetings of the Charter Review Commission on July 31st in the evening and this past Monday at 8 a.m. And the commission has elected a chair, which is Matt Vazana, a secretary, which is Howard Bachneck, and a vice chair, which is Cindy Eichhoff. And they have begun to discuss the preamble and the first two articles, and then the third article was brought up for discussion at this meeting that we had on Monday. Didn't get really too far into it, and so Article 3 is going to be a subject for the next meeting, which is on September. No,
And what does Article 3 deal with?
the council. It's the council article. The next meeting is 4 weeks from the 19th. I can't remember the date off the top of my head. And then the meeting after that is 2 weeks after that.
I think the
But
16th is the next.
The 16th and then the 30th, 16th and the 30th. And the,
8 a.m.
Yeah.
yes. And the topic for the next meeting, the 16th, will also be Article 3. And Matt had prepared a document that he sent out that kind of brought things into focus. And I'm not sure that other council members have received that, but if you want to get it, I think you can ask Sheila for them.
I think they received it.
Did they receive
I
it?
think they're on the.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. We have to make sure that everything gets to you so that, everybody get their hands on it through public document requests or council members having copies of what the commission is doing. And I think that covers it.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Melanie, you want to, I don't think we have to do the yoga studio again, but
Okay,
the rest
yeah.
of the rest of the planning
I'll just
commission?
add about the yoga studio. If anybody wants to see any of the documents, we have them, pictures, all that, interesting start of the conversation. Another issue, well, we had one issue come up. The party did not show up, so it was the second time, so we passed on that issue and it essentially went away, which is kind of a nice change. The Heritage School has
Didn't we
asked for.
vote against it?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
did.
We affirmatively voted
Voted
against
no,
it.
yeah, we voted no because they didn't show up. So, yeah, I guess they were requesting a variance and didn't show and didn't present any information, and for the second time after being
Yeah,
noticed.
but we denied their appeal.
Correct. Sorry, I did not make that clear. We denied their appeal. The next thing was Heritage School requested a sign. The sign was significantly larger than our ordinance. There is currently a sign there actually that complies with our ordinance. That was Beechbrook sign. There was some good discussion. Conversation didn't go to the appearance of the sign. All those things go to ABR. That's their purview. We were just talking about the size, and it was also denied. So that goes as to the heritage sign. Then there were another set of appeals. So this is something that I guess I need to report to council. And the conversation was a little bit troubling to me. So the report given was regarding to start out, there were a bunch of fence-related ordinances that came upon appeal to council. The start of this conversation had to do with a complaint about a front yard fence on South Woodland. It was a garden surrounded by a substantial fence with posts and decorative wood. Many of you might have seen it. A council member had received a complaint about this front yard fence, which was clearly not compliant with our ordinance. They were not the only person who had received complaints about this fence. In the report, the council member was repeatedly mentioned by name in a way that I found inappropriate. But more importantly, perhaps, the discussion was presented as an issue about a garden when it was actually an issue about a front yard fence. This was, to me, a red herring argument or a distraction, if you will. And I think the really important part was that it was a front yard fence. This potentially concerning misunderstanding or misreading of the ordinance was apparent, and I actually had to read the ordinance out loud to clear the issue. The fence, by the way, was ultimately cited, and I think it's been removed. I haven't driven by it recently.
It has been removed.
Okay, because at one point there were still some posts. Additionally, there were at least a dozen other fencing issues that came to light. Now, a lot of this fencing was either around smaller gardens that had been in place for at least some time, or trees that people were in some way trying to protect from deer or other issues. However, some of that fencing might have been in place for an extensive period of time. All of these people were cited kind of suddenly. I don't know the details of why this happened suddenly, and I think they were jarred. I would have personally preferred, and maybe we can set up a practice if we could go and kind of knock on their door, explain to them what happens. And I suggested this in the meeting, maybe have a flyer available on the website and in hand that talks about ways to deal with deer. Work with people to get at least some of this fencing down immediately, some of this fencing down after a few years, and really come up with a way of addressing what is a problem, deer, and helping people become compliant with our ordinance. I also think it would have been nice to try and work with them and not put them in a position where they had to come here kind of frightened that they were having a problem. So, you know, we might want to address our fence ordinance as to these smaller issues. As it currently stands, they're probably not allowed, although in a few of these cases, I'm not sure they were violations.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think Melanie has correctly focused on what the issue that was talked about at the Planning Commission and what was sort of tabled so far as these, you know, notices that any resident received, because it really comes down to how, what sort of advice or methodology the building department should use in exercising its appropriate code enforcement discretion when it says, I'm going to, you know, this is inappropriate, that's not. And the confusion, I think, that exists in part is because we have closely regulated deer fencing in rear yards, and we have sort of vaguely or at least ambiguously, is it all prohibited in a front yard? Because obviously some people, we have a deer problem, as Melanie has pointed out. And there should be, I think our residents expect, I suspect, that they should be able to take some reasonable step to protect either their young trees, their gardens in their front yard, just their property, their shrubs, whatever.
Well-
And like, at what point is, what's appropriate? Because I think the residents, first of all, deserve some more clear direction as to what can they do. Some, for the tree example, which I think is a really, because that's almost an easy example.
Yes, except that, and I don't want to interrupt. So some of the, if we could help them, because some of the fencing was not aesthetically necessary or aesthetically pleasing or probably necessary, both in the scale of it or the amount of time, and we could assist them in that. I do think, though, that our ordinance is pretty clear. So there, the first part of this conversation is what was troubling to me. Our ordinance is pretty clear that you can't have a fence in the front yard. You can have an unfenced garden, I suppose. I would not personally, as a person who gardens, recommend putting it out unless you just think you're going to feed every animal. And our ordinance is pretty clear on this. So one of my concerns is if we have a pretty clear ordinance and on the side there are some gray areas or some areas that we need to clean up, that doesn't mean that the primary part of the ordinance should not be enforced. And when somebody calls and complains about it, the response should be easy and clear. So we knew we shouldn't have a fence in the front yard. It's clear here. I read it out loud. And this was a fence. Whether it was a garden or not is irrelevant. So in that case, we need to be enforcing our ordinances. And I have concerns on a few occasions that perhaps we are not enforcing our ordinances. And if somebody calls to complain, that should be enough. There shouldn't be skepticism. If a council member calls to pass along a complaint, there shouldn't be skepticism about whether this is a real complaint. So that was one, that's the primary piece that's happening here, and that's my real concern.
So, no, it's just, I pulled up the ordinance.
Small
So-
things we can address.
Yeah, so it says no person shall erect a fence in residential areas without securing a permit. So it's a blanket, all fences require permits is the first sentence of this ordinance, right? And then 128003 says, if you get ARB approval, you can have a front yard fence. So I'm wondering if, since, no person shall erect a fence, that could be a 2-foot fence. It could be anything, right? It could be. So are you suggesting that maybe some guidelines that would, like, if you want to temporarily protect your newly planted tree and put a black plastic fence around it while it's growing, that should be okay?
And it's my personal opinion, we should probably, certainly before we cite people, try to assist them in becoming compliant on things like
Yeah.
small trees. But I would direct you also to look at 1280.10, the deer fences, where
Right,
it says fences this is referencing deer fences. Fences shall be permitted in rear yards for the purpose of protecting landscaping and other vegetation from destruction by deer upon the following conditions. And it goes into them. And including a plan submitted to the ABR. But
So you still have to get ABR approval, even for a
yes,
deer
but the
fence.
main part is that there are no deer fences in the front yard implicit in this. The deer fences are in the backyard.
Because the
So,
deer don't go in the front yard.
well, believe me, I run around with the deer spray, so I know the deer love the front yard. But if you want a deer fence and you want things that, and that's something we could also believe, I think we should be assisting help people with how they deal with deer. There are plants that you can plant that the deer don't like as much. There are things that you could do to help keep the deer away. Nothing is foolproof. I know that.
But is it possible to draft something to give clarity to homeowners so they don't have to, so a sleeve to protect our young tree, all good.
And possibly, and I think we
Or-
should also be able to give them that.
Or fences that are 3 feet high or low and not chain link. I mean, they're, to protect a small garden. I mean, my prior neighbor always had a very small fence, but then they put it over the top too. And it was pretty unobtrusive but it kept the deer out because it was, 2 or 3 feet high, but that way, and it was black wire and you hardly noticed it.
It becomes more like a cage at that point.
Like a cage, right. You cage,
And that's,
caged
we
in
would
it.
have to change. Right now, we're saying you can basically do those things in your backyard.
yeah,
So right now, we're allowing that in the backyard.
yeah,
And I know plenty of people have those gardens.
yeah.
We're not allowing, and that's a judgment by council. I would steer away from having a big garden in the front yard that was fenced with, you're gonna have to do that. But trees, small plants, when they're young, at a certain point, those have to get taken down, just like anything else. And actually probably should be taken down. I don't want to be, I'm no expert, but I don't think that you're supposed to, for example, keep trees staked as they grow. You're not supposed to do some of these things as the trees become to grow.
Right.
It's actually not good for them.
I have
But that's something that we can work through and maybe we could participate with people. But really the essence here is the core violations need to be enforced. We can work on the gray areas. So that's
Like the
two.
tree protective fences are,
We can work on that, but we still, we can change the ordinance, but if we don't like it, but the ordinance says no deer fences in the front yard
Hmm.
and no fences even in the front yard
Front
like
yard.
this,
Unless it's decorative.
unless it's decorative.
Decorative
You can
and
have-
approved by ABR.
And
It is,
approved by
it is crystal clear
yeah.
in the ordinance. There's no question about it.
And I'm concerned that when people call and complain, that they should, their
Yeah.
concerns should be honored, especially when they're.
It strikes me there's a way to,
Dr. Wong has had her hand up.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Just a
And
question.
I'd like
So-
to let her participate.
So what if there's a fence that's present and there's no permit? Does that person have to take it down or do they, even if it's in the backyard and they don't have a permit, can they get a permit afterwards or do they have to then take it down if it's not on city record?
Is there a grandfather clause in there?
Is there a grandfather?
Well, it's, if it was
Pre-existing.
if it predated the zoning code, it would be grandfathered. in.
And we
But-
have those.
Well, I don't know
Well,
how we
remember,
document
we
them.
had, I don't know, no, I'm saying I remember it because we had some areas with the riparian setback. We had pre-existing fence there.
Oh, for sure.
So, I mean, they're probably all over the city. But,
I think it's worth looking at this because I think that there's a lot of stuff here that we ought to deal with. Because the deer are a bigger problem than they used to be.
Yeah.
A lot of people are trying to grow the trees. I mean, that's why we give out the saplings and all that stuff. We're trying to grow a
Saplings
couple
have,
trees.
do we give them like little protective things?
Right.
too?
right.
Right.
So maybe that we need to
Well,
update.
what I'm going to suggest so that we can get some clarity about the conversation as to how can we advance and say we either want to permit, we want a total ban, continue some sort of, very strict interpretive total ban, or we're going to have a more flexible situation or only a permitted situation. what I suggest is that we have George and Paul do some sort of survey of how other communities are dealing with the front yard situations for this deer protection. I don't think we certainly don't want, like in our backyard deer fence thing, a minimum of 1,000 square foot deer fence.
Massive.
No one wants that in a front yard. But there should be some potential reasonable accommodation we can make that's still attractive for people to be able to protect, their investment and the beauty of their home, and still, not turn the front yard into, a caged off netted thing. So why don't we have George and Paul take a look at that, come back with some suggestions so that we can accomplish some greater clarity. I think it'll help Paul in his code enforcement. And, we won't have, situations where there's, less clarity about the whole.
But I
situation.
really
And
think we need to
I-
assist, oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I have something to say on this because I believe that this issue is specifically brings a few things to light that we are lacking in there are some enforcement issues, there's some communication issues, and there's some ordinance language that really needs to be looked at. And I've been thinking about kind of how to solve this problem. And I believe that we should, as a council, be receiving some updates from the building department. If Paul is having trouble enforcing things because the language is vague or it's outdated or there seem to be repetitive issues that he's coming across, that perhaps like even a monthly update to us of this is what's happening in the building department. This is, just some communication there, because it was surprising to all of us that this was an enforcement issue and that there were so many violations that maybe we could have worked out these kinks years ago when it was first brought to light. So I don't know how the rest of council feels, if perhaps an update about just what's happening. I feel that we are disconnected from the building department and we don't know what we don't know. That I think that it's an opportunity to open up that line of communication for all of us, for Paul to come to us and for us to come to Paul.
I think that would be so valuable. I really do. I feel like
I
I'm
agree.
hearing
He
things.
doesn't have to be like once a quarter or
Yeah, and-
something like that to update from the building department. kind of
And
thing.
my goal is not to create more work for anybody, but rather to foster the collaborative efforts of the city, of us and the building department. So, however that is, if quarterly makes more sense, but just something, and if you want to come to present, great. Even if it's in writing of, these are the violations, the citations that they had to issue, this is what's going on, just so that we have a pulse on that too. So I think it'll help us to be more effective as the legislative branch.
I don't
So-
think, I don't
One
think it
time
would be
there
a
was-
big,
I'm sorry, one time there was a report that came from the building inspection department on a regular basis
Years
about
ago.
what was going on, yeah. This was
And
a
even
long
something
while
like,
back.
sometimes it could be a tally, like how many,
3 new homes.
how many new fence inspections have we had? So that would be a way for us to start thinking, is this an issue for us? How many new home inspections do we have? How many additions do we have? All of those things, if we could have the data on it, would be so valuable. I feel like sometimes I sit in these meetings and I'm piecemeal telling you guys something that came up. That's, so, and in this case, I'm trying to actually convey two things out of context. One is a problem where there wasn't enforcement. Another is an area, in my estimation, another is an area of a gray area that we might want to address. And I still stress that I think how we deal with our neighbors is important. So yes, we can change the ordinance, but I think we need to assist them. People don't know. So some of these things are unsightly and it might, we can change the ordinance and you'll still have something unsightly where people are using driveway stakes, they've left over from their snowplow and doing it with mesh. We could do better.
we used to have, we've gone through iterations of the website. On the website, I know I have seen, at least unless it got dropped in the latest iteration, I know we had a deer section about deer, plant, like you said, suggested plants, things like that. That was on the website.
Maybe we need to push it out again, and when people have a problem,
Yeah.
give them.
Pushing it
that.
out again, I think, is a really good
And
idea.
if there's a problem, and the other thing is, if somebody puts in an illegal garden, like, we could go to them and say, at the end of the season, pick your vegetables, no more garden there. You know, we have to treat people like our neighbors.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the conversation. We'll work on this report idea. I think it's not a heavy lift.
Thank you.
We have the data.
Yeah.
And, we put it, as you may have observed, well, maybe not, you don't see that. In our state of the city every year, I report about the bills. I don't talk about how many times did we take someone to court. I leave that part out. But all that data is available, and we can put it together quarterly. I think sounds like a reasonable thing.
And I love some of the smaller things, like not just new homes, because that's really important, but even some of the smaller things, so people could understand departmentally what's going on.
Yeah, there's actually an enormous part of the construction that happens in the city are renovations and things like that.
Mhm.
They're not,
And other
a new
things,
house.
outbuildings, including sheds, fences.
It's not-
I'm trying to think of what
we-
else.
We'll generate some sort of.
Something like that.
We'll generate some.
Well, and I think it's good reminders for the community too. It's like if they hear it here, it's getting reported, they understand what it is, what the expectation is.
Okay,
So-
that's all.
As this is currently drafted, every fence has to have, ABR approval,
Yes.
every single fence.
No, I thought backyard deer fences do not.
Nope,
It's in
they
there.
do.
Says it.
Backyard deer fences
I think
and
specifically.
Temporary deer fence does not require, I apologize.
it says a
Just
plan.
the
is
temporary
submitted,
deer
but
fence does
a
not.
plan- A plan has to be submitted. Under Part E, a plan has been submitted pursuant to section 128002 to the ABR. That's for deer fences.
I believe that's correct.
So, and the same with backyard fence. So every fence needs an ABR,
Does not require the submittal.
as this is reading now.
Well, that would be a
I thought we got
temporary,
rid of that,
If
Jim.
you get over 1,000 square feet of deer fencing, then that plan goes to the ABR.
but that's a temporary fence. So I would assume a temporary fence would get taken down seasonally. A temporary
We
fence.
did something though, years ago with deer fencing in the backyard. I thought where it was recognized by the then council
It's
that
not required to pay it.
a seasonal restriction on deer fencing didn't make a lot of sense because the deer were coming winter or summer. And to tell people you have to take it up and down wasn't really effective so far as addressing the problem of the deer. And
So Paul,
I thought we had
Don't think-
changed
I
that.
think the
thought we
ordinance
changed that.
refers-
no.
The ordinance refers to it as a temporary deer fence. So to me, a temporary deer fence is you put up your garden and you put a deer fence around it in the backyard.
And then you
and
take it
Take
down.
it down.
But-
and-
But that's only for gardens. So the only time you don't have an ABR is a deer fence in a small, less than 1,000 square foot garden.
Mhm.
So if you put it, the tile outside of your perimeter, you got an ABR approval. That's the only fence not requiring advance ABR
That's
approval
correct,
is.
yes.
And only in the
That's your
backyard.
understanding of this. All other fences have to go ABR regardless, except small garden enclosing deer fences.
Yes.
So what we're doing here, thinking about doing, and I agree, we should get input elsewhere, saying these tree protecting fences or other small fences would not have to go to ABR.
Yeah, I don't think we.
So that's a bucket we would put these in.
Yeah, we don't,
But every,
ABR does not need to see every minor thing.
agree, but we would be making that exception. That's just how we would draft this. But right now, so you don't, every backyard fence comes to ABR, right?
We made a policy change if the fence meets every single requirement in the zoning code and it's an interior lot fence, it's approved administratively. If it's a corner lot fence.
What do you mean? No, that's not what the ordinance says.
That, how can an administrative decision be made on something that there's an ordinance clearly spelling out?
That's de facto legislating.
This is backyard fences, I'm reading now a different section, 128005, fences in the backyard along property lines A plan has submitted to the ARB and the board has determined the fence is compatible. So that's in the code, right?
Yeah.
So that's,
Okay, we'll address that.
all right. Okay.
When
I
did
think we
that
got a path
start?
forward.
Okay.
Is that a
we have-
long-standing policy that you guys had, or is that more recent?
It went recent about a year ago.
Okay, we can't do
Okay.
that.
Is there anything,
It's not right to the people who did it the right way, and it's still clearly in the ordinance as that way.
department heads, anything? Okay. I'll get to the mayor then. We had a wonderfully successful centennial celebration last weekend. I was, I want to send out special thanks and kudos to our building and service department personnel who just put in yeoman effort that day to make it a success. As you all know, the rain was very challenging for us. The decision-making as to whether or not we're inside or outside, the department basically had set it up. The guys in the service department, along with Rachel and Tara down in building, had basically set up outside because the storm was supposed to clear, then it wasn't clearing and it became slow moving. And within an hour, they broke the whole thing down and occupied the service department building with it. Thanks also to Jim and the foresight on Friday to have had all the equipment moved out, anticipating we might have this challenge. And they cleaned it out and scrubbed it down. And, I think a lot of people were surprised to see how spacious.
That was huge. I didn't realize how big the building is.
That's a big building.
It really was big.
I don't know
And
where
how
you
they
put all this
cleared
stuff,
it.
but look good. It's all
How they cleared
outside.
it, is unbelievable to me how you guys got all that equipment out of there and made it a clean open
Yeah,
space.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, well done.
It was very nice. And we found a really good pony ride guy finally, which we're very excited about. This guy drove 3 hours south of Columbus to get here.
And there was a long line for the
Yeah.
plan.
Long line, and he had multiple ponies instead of just 17 hand horses for these little kids to get on. And it was just, it had a wonderful feel, something that happened during the meeting or during the event. If some of you may know, at the 75th, the city found a young lady whose name was Pepper Pike. And I thought she lived in California. She lived not in Ohio.
Wisconsin, I think.
Wisconsin. She lived some faraway place. And the city flew her in and made her Miss Pepper Pike and gave her, stuff. And that was it. And going for our historic research of the city, we had seen it, and there was a brief conversation. I wonder whatever happened to Miss Pepper Pike. Because she didn't live here. And about halfway through the event, one of our firefighters brings this woman over with her husband and her about 13-year-old daughter, and it's Pepper. She now lives in Hudson, Ohio.
Oh my God.
Did you
And she was here, and she heard about our event,
Wow.
and she just got on her horse and came here. And it was really fun. She was a lovely woman, and she was very, very excited to be here. And she got a new fireman's cap, and it was just, it was a big smile to have her here.
Yeah.
And the whole event it was just really, it was pleasurable. We had a very good turnout, as any of you who were there saw. It's hard to judge. We're thinking at a minimum, there were 600 folks who came in and out because it's a flowing, event with people coming for an hour, leaving, other people replacing them. By the amount of cake we served and the hot dogs, we had 300 hot dogs and they went pretty fast. So we know there were a lot of people there. And
And I would note that I was surprised, the number of young children. There seemed like there were hundreds of little tiny kids there, which is
Yeah.
great to see, so.
yeah, what was real, and one of the things that that we'll be including in our time capsule for the centennial is, and this is really Tara's wonderful idea. She had this craft table where all these little kids were writing birthday card congratulations. And, they're just little kids there with their stamp art and markers. So we got a big stack of those. They're all going in the time capsule. And it was really nice. So I'm glad that it came off so well despite the threatening weather.
And the music was excellent.
Mhm.
Yeah, the swing band was
Yeah.
good.
Very
Yeah, they
good.
were
Yeah.
good. And the CERT team that
Oh my
volunteers
gosh.
at every event. I
And
mean,
the CERT team
what a
had a
hardworking
wonderful,
group of individuals.
the CERT team had like 26 new volunteers signed up. for
That's
CERT,
amazing.
Which, significantly exceeds any other sign up that they've ever had in an event. So I think the people are enthused about their city and it was nice to see. Tomorrow night, there's a wonderful band coming to Pepper Pike. Becky Boyd, if you haven't heard her, she's blues and jazz. She's really an outstanding artist and musician. So I invite everyone to come see Becky Boyd tomorrow. On October 1st, when is the Harvest Fest? I can't remember. It's after October. 1st.
It's after October.
It's in September.
No,
Well, I'll
it's
keep- I'll
October.
keep-
October.
I feel like it's like October.
First weekend in October.
I can't remember where the Harvest Fest is. It's coming up. I'll give more details next week on the other upcoming events. And that's all I have. Anyone else? All right, audience comments, if any? Richard? Richard Leskovic on Gates,
What Jen said, I was amazed at the number of young children, because when I first started going to high street social, most people in attendance were eligible for social security.
Right.
And it's very nice to see this dynamic of the young people in the city. I mean, it's really, although I was fortunate when I got there, although they still might have a couple hot dogs left.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. then
October 6th, by the way. That's the date.
October-
Harvest Fest is October 6th.
It's a Sunday now. Okay. We stand adjourned.
Do you know if the charter review stuff's gonna be on the website, like everything, or?
I mean, did you